We, the people of the state of Jefferson, ever mindful of the rights we hold most dear, life, liberty, and property, are compelled to establish this, our new state, for the preservation of these natural, inalienable rights. Our mandate for the protection of life, liberty, and property gives urgent voice to our demand for representation that reflects our needs, our history, our culture, and our moral imperfectitude. Time has come for 51. This is Terry Rapoza.
And Wynn Carpenter. You're listening to Jefferson State of Mind podcast.
How you doing, everybody? This is Terry Rapoza. I'm here with Mark Baird, the spokesman for the state of Jefferson, among many other things. And we are going to be talking now about representation, because I think that any clear-minded person would understand that without representation, nothing else really matters. I mean, if we can't be represented, if our voice isn't heard, then what do we have? So, Mark, take it away.
Well, once again, if we don't have representation, we have nothing, and in fact, we have tyranny. And we have tyranny right now because the representative ratio in the state of California is the worst representative ratio of any state in the nation, and it's 300% worse than state number 49.
Which is who?
Texas.
Wow.
Yeah. So at 1 million per state senator and 1/2 million per state assembly, you might think you have representation, but try using it. And so let's go back again, because once again, none of this happened by accident. The founding fathers didn't think of any of this stuff. They copied it from other people. This has been going on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and they've known about it. And the founding fathers read all of those men. They could read Greek, they could read Latin. They knew what other people thought. They knew how preceding governments fell. They knew what destroyed societies, the Romans, Italian society, Greeks. They knew those things. And with all of that knowledge, they invented a divinely inspired form of government that I think is the greatest document ever devised by mankind. And it needs very little change. And if it does need changing, there is an amendment process through which it can be changed. But no one does that because they think it's easier just to usurp your liberty and steal your representation, and that's what they're doing. So Thomas Paine said early on in his little pamphlet, oddly enough called Common Sense, that the first legislature would be held under the branches of a big oak tree. Everybody basically shows up and says what they want to have happen. And then as the colony grows, representation must also grow, so that all parts of the colony, he didn't say so that every man would have one vote, he said so that all parts of the colony would remain represented. And the reason he said that is different geographies need different things, and different peoples within those geographies demand certain things of their representative that their neighbors may not demand and may not even care about and may not want. In fact, they might be detrimental to them. So he said, as the colony grows, it is necessary that representation also grow so that all parts of the colony remain represented, and even more importantly, so that those we elect will never be free to form a separate agenda from those who elect them. Now, what happens when representation doesn't grow, but population continues to grow? You have more and more people dependent upon one representative, and he cares less and less about you as an individual, and less about your small community, and less about what you need, but he cares more and more about where the money comes from. And those with money have access to representation because, look, if a district in California with 1 million people per one state senator, if every one of his constituents called him once a year, he'd be able to spend 1.2 seconds per day with each representative.
And never sleep.
Well, no, that would, based on an 8-hour day, working 271 days a year with time off for Christmas and so on, he'd be able to spend about 2 seconds per call.
Yeah.
That's not representation.
No.
And in the Jefferson effort, we've had many of them tell us that, they don't have face-to-face meetings with constituents.
Yes.
But I'll bet you they have lots of face-to-face meetings with lobbyists and people who write big checks and big corporations and their interests. And so really, who do they represent? And I'm postulating it ain't you. And I can probably prove that if you give me a few minutes. So what happened with a lot of the states, and with California in particular, was as the counties grew, they were adding representatives from 1858, where we only had 6 counties. We had 4, 5, 6 state senators. I think we might have had 4 or 5. And the senator from Los Angeles would ride through Santa Barbara County and ask the 8 people that lived there what they wanted on his way up to Benicia or wherever the capital was. But then by 1872, they got to a tipping point because the Chinese population was starting to grow and miners were coming and going and population was going crazy. And they thought, well, do we expand? And the answer was not only no, it was hell no. Why should we share power with these new people? Why should we give them anything? Why don't retain all that power? And so in 1872, they locked the representation in the state of California at 80 in the Assembly and 40 in the Senate. Mm-hmm. Well, that just wasn't really going to work. In fact, it already wasn't working because the handwriting was on the wall. And in 1861, Andre Pico, who was a Mexican general at the Battle of Buena Vista, he almost whipped the 1st Cavalry in that battle. And once after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and Pico became a U.S. citizen by treaty, he was one of the most fervent patriots you could find. And he saw immediately that California was too big to govern. He agreed with President Polk, who said in 1848, California's too damn big to govern. He said the populous North is overwhelming the agrarian South, and we have no representation in Sacramento. And he was right. And so he authored the first state split. And it passed the legislature, Assembly, and Senate because the Northerners didn't want anything to do with largely the Mexican farmers in Southern California. It passed the Assembly. Governor Walker signed it, and it went to the U.S. Senate. And, darn, that Civil War started. The Civil War started, and they shelved the bill.
Yes.
They tabled it and took no action. But there have been many, many attempts to illustrate that California lacks representation and to split the state. So now we fast forward to years and years later. In 1926, California Farm Bureau realized that it was starting to become an untenable place because the population centers in Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area could outvote the counties that had less population and were largely rural and farming communities every time. And so they authored Prop 28. And in 1926, they put that forward, and it was called the federal model of government. It was designed to mimic the federal government, where each county would have 1 state senator, and the exclusion to that would be counties that were so small that they had to share, and there were no more than 3 counties, and they had to touch one another. So they had to be geographically, historically, culturally, and economically linked, at least, and then they had to share a state senator. And that worked. And you know what? That passed, and it passed overwhelmingly, and it even passed in the cities because people knew that we needed a check on power.
Yes.
And so here's how it worked. Because the counties we had 58 counties by then, and so those counties would be able to check the assembly, which were largely ruled by urbanites, and none of the stupid stuff made it to the governor's desk. And it worked because what happened was the unbridled power of the mob was stopped by the Senate almost every time. And the only reason it wasn't stopped is when something really needed to be done. When something was important to everybody, it passed both houses. What do you know? Isn't that kind of how it's supposed to work?
Supposed to work that way.
But the crazy stuff would never make it that far.
Right.
Because someone would say, no, this is too expensive, or it strips us of our liberty. And so we continued as a state like that until 1962, when Baker versus Carr hit. And then after Reynolds versus Sims, it forced a change in the California Constitution. And that was the end of it. I mean, California was a train wreck after that. Yeah. And it wasn't very long until it manifested itself. Until finally now you have an assembly and a Senate that are rubber stamps for one another. We have a monoparty. There are no statewide offices held by the minority party. There are no, it is an unimpeachable majority. In other words, there is no veto by the governor because they're overwhelmingly monoparty votes.
Right.
And so crazy things are happening. Crazy things like you can't have a gasoline lawnmower.
That's insane. And, explain to the folks Article 4, Section 3, because a lot of people seem to think there's other ways to do this, but the only way to do it is Article 4, Section 3.
Well, look, we are constitutionalists, and we're also,
Right.
by and large, godly people. And so for us, we have to do these things legally, morally, and ethically.
Right.
Well, there's only one legal method of forming a new state
Right.
in the United States, and that's Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. And it says that no state shall be formed from the territory of an existing state or two adjoining states unless the state legislature agrees and Congress agrees. So you have to have the agreement of the state you want to get away from, and you have to have the agreement of Congress in order to join the union as a new state. And that's the stumbling block, because in California, we've been told by the Democratic monoparty that they will never, ever, ever allow people to have adequate representation in conservative counties. They will not allow it.
Yeah, and the governor doesn't have to sign off on it, nor does the president.
Well, that's kind of, that's a little touchy. It's a little more muddy because it doesn't expressly mention the president or the governor in Article 4, Section 3. However, prior state splits, and there have been 4 of them,
Yes.
were accomplished in a variety of means, and sometimes the president signed off on it and sometimes he didn't. So
Explain West Virginia, because that's really that was an interesting one. A lot of people try to use West Virginia in their thought process of a state split, but that happened during the Civil War. You want to explain that?
Well, it happened in the Civil War because the people of West Virginia had seceded from the Union. The people of West Virginia didn't want to do that, and so they declared that their state was in sedition, and they did not want to engage in seditious behavior, so they appealed directly to Congress. And I think that's an avenue that we may end up trying to follow.
And I think you're right. I know that in a lot of cases you pointed out different signs of sedition and insurrection by the government of California. Can you explain a little tiny bit of that?
Well, the governor of California is a felon. I mean, he's in violation of Title 8, Section 1324,
Yep.
harboring and shielding
Yes.
an illegal alien, among many other things. He usurped the power of the Emergency Services Act to control private property and shut down the businesses in the state of California, destroying my business, among many, thousands of businesses. And I've read the ESA 100 times. In the Emergency Services Act, there is no extra constitutional
there is
power
not.
unless you've been invaded and you're physically at war.
Right, that's right.
The government has the power to take money from one department and give it to another, to borrow people from one department and give it to another, but they have no power over your liberty or your property. And so he usurped that power, and he got away with it. It was since his treatment of the ESA has been rejected by a federal court.
Yes.
Well, what's our recourse? Are we going to be able to sue the governor? Is he going to replace the businesses we lost, the lives that were destroyed, the children that left the state because they can't live here and can't work here? Is he going to restore the liberty that he took away from us? And the answer to that's no.
No.
And that job is up to us. And if we don't do that, then shame on us.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing to me to think that the executive branch, it just usurped the separation of powers in California totally. I mean, he has made mandates, which are, there's not laws, they're basically suggestions, maybe guidelines that he would want somebody to follow. But people are treating mandates like they're law, and they're not law.
Well, that's another thing in a dictatorial government where you only have one political party, and you can look at the communists and the socialists all over the world to find that model. When he makes a declaration and he forces it upon people and it takes their money and takes their liberty, then his legislature just creates a law after the fact and rubber stamps the deal ex post facto.
I love what you just said. You know, a lot of people talk about not complying, but complying is different than not submitting. And I think your term is excellent, and that really is what it is. We submit to tyranny. We submit to mandates. We submit to quote, rules, social contracts. What say you?
Well, that's absolutely right. And we learned that 30 years ago when Fish and Game came to take our water. And we started using our pamphlet, and we started wearing these in open pistol holsters. And about 200 of us went to the first Fish and Game meeting where they were going to take our pre-constitutional water rights away from us and impose $25,000 fees per ranch and make us get a license and make us give them unfettered access to our property. And we had T-shirts that said, "We will not submit." And we started wearing constitutions in pistol holsters. And you know what they did? They canceled the meeting, and every Fish and Game employee left Siskiyou County And the next day in the Capitol Press, they had a big article, Fish and Game cancels series of informative meetings because they were afraid of an armed insurrection.
Don't you love it?
Well, I love the fact that they finally got the point.
They got the point.
Yeah. And then later, when the water board came to take our water through a different means, they called it a ranch management plan in order to mitigate non-point source pollution, or whatever they called it.
Man.
And we went to their meeting, a couple of hundred of us, and I submitted the ranch management plan on behalf of everyone. I said, here's our ranch management plan. We'll do whatever the hell we want with the property we paid for. End of plan. And we all left. And you know what they did after the fact? They recognized the spirit of environmentalism, and they gave us a 7-year categorical exemption to the ranch management plan. And here's the thing. When you submit to tyranny, you're volunteering to every aspect of it.
Absolutely.
If you fail to submit, now you're telling them that they're not going to get away with it, and you will not go quietly into the night.
You will not submit. Mark Baird, thank you, brother. That was excellent. Hey, everybody. It's Terry Rapoza. I'm here with Mark Baird, the spokesman for the state of Jefferson. And we're going to be talking about how all the different things that we've previously gone over, the mess we've gotten ourselves into in California, the Second Amendment and how we could protect that, representation, a solution for that. How would things be different in the things we have been talking about in a smaller state like Jefferson?
I think it's important to start first with the fact that they have gone terribly wrong. Government has run amok. People are no longer in charge of the government they formed to serve them. In the state of Jefferson, we would hope to correct that. And we would hope to do that by forming a constitution that would take us back to the basics of government, the basics of liberty, and then make that constitution have teeth to those who attempt to govern us, and also make it very difficult to change, as the federal constitution is now. And we modeled a lot of that after the federal constitution, but it's really, really important to understand that, once again, and I'll say this again and again and again, people formed government to protect the liberty they hold most dear. Mm-hmm. They did not form government to be the big grandma nanny, take the place of God, and tell them every step to take, every breath, how much you can breathe, when you can breathe, where you can breathe, what you have on your face when you breathe, and what you jab into your body, what your children learn in school. Those are usurpations of liberty. And Thomas Paine was pretty clear about that too. He said that any power exercised by the government that is not explicitly outlined in the Constitution is a usurpation of power and is therefore illegal. And that's a principle we're going to adhere to in the state of Jefferson. How will we have teeth, though? How will we make that stick? And this is how. We have districts that are small enough so that whoever you elect in Thomas Paine's common sense will have to be responsible to the people. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you have a state senator for 1 million people and an assemblyman for 500,000 people, he doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care what you want. He doesn't care what you do. And you can't make him care because he has 999,999 other people to get money and votes from. Just because you're mad, it doesn't matter to him. And here's the worst part about it. It is not a stretch to say that no matter how big a movement you tried to gather, if you went out and got 1,000 of your friends or 2,000 of your friends and you went out and really campaigned, in California, 97% of the time you're not going to get rid of an incumbent because you can't raise that kind of money. You don't have that kind of reach, and we've tried that. We tried fielding candidates for assembly and for Senate and so on and so forth. And we're outspent every time because it is the money that wins the election and not the people. So in the state of Jefferson, we propose liberty and protection of liberty through much smaller districts where the elected person, has to care what those who elect him think. So if you had a district, let's say, and this is an arithmetic game. Okay, so 1 million per state senator. Does he care what you think? That's obvious. No, you don't. Half the people don't even know who he is. I mean, Brian Dowley doesn't care what I think. He doesn't even care what my whole county thinks because they're not the majority. They're not even close. They can't get him elected. They don't have enough money. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's cut that in half. What about one for 500,000? No. What about one for 250,000? No. What about one for even 150,000? Well, we're getting there, but that's still,
Man.
they're not going to care what you think with that many people. They're going to care what the people with the money think, because that's how they get reelected. That's how they continue power. And remember, Nancy Pelosi made $150 million off being a congresswoman. Maxine Waters has made $50 or $100 million off being a congresswoman.
Yeah.
You know, so the money and the power.
Money game.
Well, it's a big money game. They think it's worth being an evil, crooked so-and-so to get that kind of money. So now let's get down to the realm of the believable. And once again, it's just an arithmetic problem. What about one for 10,000? Well, now we're getting there. If you elected a bum in the city of Reading, and he represented the city of Reading in the Jefferson Assembly, we'll say, and he had 10,000 constituents, it wouldn't be that big a stretch for you to go out and recruit a couple of hundred people because you think the guy's a bum or a crook, and you go and you replace him with someone that you think will do a better job. And let's take that down to one for 5,000. If you had 5,000 constituents who elected an assembly person,
And those are just people. So
Those are just people.
maybe 1,000 voters in that.
maybe 1,000 or 2,000 or 4,000.
Because that's the voting process.
Right,
Yeah.
you're right. Do you think that person would care what the voters think? Oh, you betcha
You bet they would.
He would be on his hands and knees wanting to know what the voters think. And that's why in places like New Hampshire and Vermont, where the average state senator represents 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, 67% of the time a challenger runs for office, he has a chance and he wins, because the district is small enough that it is not out of the realm of the believable for you or me or anybody in this room to go out and gather enough of a troop of helpers or voters or whatever, campaigners, to go out and challenge that person and maybe replace him if you think he's a crook or a bum. And that's how we intend to protect liberty in the state of Jefferson. These people will be scared to death of their voters.
Yeah,
They'll
I think
have to care.
Yeah, and you're so correct about that. When you look at this whole thing, and if you have 5,000 people, even 10,000 people, well, 5,000 probably would be better as far as in your district, and say 1,500 vote, those are the people that basically, well, now if 200 or 300 of them have a thought process, even 100 of them have a thought process to where they can be movers and shakers, all of a sudden they're going to be able to, people are going to be able to stand up. People are going to be able to have their voice heard. Now, you mentioned New Hampshire and Vermont. The amount of money now, and I'd like you to talk about that. Think about the amount of money that it costs to do a campaign there, as opposed to, what does it cost? Almost $1 billion for governor?
Well, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars anyway,
Yeah.
and in
Probably
those
$1 billion.
in those smaller states, it costs about $1,200.
Yeah.
You pay your filing fee, you put gas in your car, and you go knock on 2,500 doors.
And you're
If you
done.
and if you can get a majority, then you win. And if you can't get the majority, then you lose. And that's how we want to do this. And so in order to do that, we really have to start over. California needs a total reboot for the young people, the computer people out there.
Yeah.
We need to do a reboot. We need to start over, because what we're saying is all Californians deserve a chance at success, even Californians in small rural communities. Our community has been devastated economically and politically by political
And you're talking about
decisions.
Siskiyou County.
Siskiyou County.
Yeah, which was beautiful. Natural resources up the yin-yang.
Used to have them, and now
Yeah.
they're all burned up. But,
Yeah.
But you know, we used to have the ability to feed our children, and so our children could get jobs and raise families of their own there. And we've been denied those profitable businesses by people in Sacramento who don't even know where we are. And let me tell you a little story. There was an Indian gaming casino that they proposed in Wairika. We had a plebiscite in the county, and 87% of the people said no to this Indian gaming casino. They didn't want it. So here's what happened. They went down and they got a Los Angeles state senator to sponsor a bill to allow an Indian gaming casino in Wairika, and the guy stands up at the podium and he says, "Hey, nobody's against this." But nobody asked the people who were affected, number one, and you couldn't voice your concern to him because you send an email to a senator that doesn't represent you, it bounces back electronically, automatically, and he says, "Don't talk to me, talk to your guy."
Unbelievable. Yet that particular senator had the position of saying, hey, this is what you're going to have to live with in Siskiyou County.
Exactly. And,
Wow.
and they're tearing out 4 dams on the Klamath River for exactly the same reason. Fully functional, perfectly operable, hydroelectric dams that supply the cleanest, greenest, cheapest power on the planet to over 70,000 homes, and they're going to be destroyed because the state of California is filling the coffers of some environmental organizations that stand to gain $4.5 billion of the taxpayers' money in order to rip out those 4 perfectly good dams.
And those governor's agreement are unconstitutional.
Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 says no state will make any treaty
Without
or
the
any
permission.
deal
Yep.
with any other state without the permission of Congress, and they
Right.
don't have
That's
it.
right.
Yeah. So that's where the tyranny comes from. But the liberty comes from opening the eyes of the people and giving them actual power over the government they formed to serve them. So if you are paying attention to that guy you elect, you and the other 5,000 people that put him in his chair, you can get rid of him the instant he starts to go wrong. And that's the beauty of the state of Jefferson.
Yeah, I think that another thing that we have in our Constitution in Jefferson is the Constitutional Compliance Committee. You want to talk a little bit about that? That was kind of a brainchild of yours anyway, you and Janet Chandler.
That's kind of a tough one. It's not, in my opinion, I think the people will have to help us finish that, but what we intend for that, what our thought was,
Yes.
is that prior to the introduction of legislation, it will be reviewed, and if it does not comport or comply with the Constitution of the state of Jefferson, it'll be returned to its author so that he can change it so that it does. And what we want to do is we want to have so many gateways through which our liberty is filtered that these guys won't be able to take it to begin with. It'll be very difficult for them to take it, and it'll be very easy for the people who elect them to stop them from taking it.
And we're also limiting bills, aren't we, as far as bills per representative?
Each legislature will be allowed 1 or 2 bills per year. And we'll have a 2-year budgetary cycle so that 1 year they work on budget, the next year they work on law. And I think that, and again, because what really do we have in California? We have a situation where they pass 900 or 1,000 laws a year. And
At least.
And none of those do what the state of California was designed to do, which is protect your liberty. Every single one of those takes your money or your liberty away from you and makes you a criminal in the home that your fathers fought to secure.
Yeah, that's the only thing government was created for anyway, was to protect the rights of the sovereign.
Right. And they're not protecting them here. They're taking them from you, and they're charging you for the privilege.
You know, when you stop and think about the amount of money, I know that a particular congressman just prior to Doug LaMalfa walked away with about, I think, a net worth of $12 million. And it's like, you know, I know that Senator Ted Gaines owns a number of homes, yet the guy's never done anything but work for the government.
Well, I mean, ask yourself how Maxine Waters made $50 million, or Nancy made $150 million, or Dianne Feinstein probably worth $500 million. You know,
It must be a real struggle to live on something like that, right?
well, you know, yeah. But the point is, we allowed it. We did this to ourselves.
We allowed it. That's exactly right. You know, I can remember hearing that from, actually, it was Trish Clark that made that comment. She's, you know, people were griping about the government. And she just said, that's because we let them. You know, as long as we let them. And I think, again, I want to go back to what you said about not submitting. I think that's just so poignant in the fact that that's really what it is. You know, not complying means you may not comply with something that's reasonable. Not submitting means that you don't submit to someone having power over you.
Well, here's my question to the people of Jefferson or the people of California, whatever you want to call it. It's a simple question. Have you had enough yet? Are you okay with $5 a gallon for gas, or soon to be $10? Are you okay with not being able to buy a gasoline lawnmower? Are you okay with your children learning about the gay lifestyle in elementary school? Are you okay with a school board powered by the United States Department of Justice investigating you as a domestic terrorist because you object to what your children are being taught in school? Are you okay with a state that allows that? Are you okay being a slave to the government that your fathers and forefathers gave their lives to secure? Are you okay with that? Because if you're not okay, there's an answer. And it is to get away from them, to start over, to do a reboot, to form a state where liberty and justice are the cornerstones of the government, and to where that model of government is extremely difficult to change. And if we do this right, we could protect liberty for 50 generations until some load of politicians is smart enough to to steal it somehow. But we have to fight for this, everybody. This isn't a gift. It isn't free. We were given the gift by God on April the 19th, 1775, when 70 of our countrymen stood against 700 of their own government, and they did not break and they did not fold. And about 10 of them gave their lives right on the spot. And in the end, we formed a government that was divinely inspired to protect our liberty forever and ever, and we gave that gift away. We gave it back to the people who stole our liberty from us without even so much as a nod on our part. So my question to you is, if you've had enough, what will you do to accomplish the only job that a citizen can accomplish in the Constitution of the United States? There's only one. When you read the Constitution, there is only one job that we, the people, are tasked with, and that is to secure to our liberty, to ourselves and our posterity.
And Patrick Henry said,
Patrick Henry said, give me liberty and give me death, unless you're talking about something else that he said.
That's what he said.
Yeah. I mean, is life so sweet, or, is life so sweet to be, or peace so dear to be purchased at the price of liberty and chains? Almighty God forbid it, for I know not what course others may take, and this is an individual decision. As for me, give me liberty or give me death.
Mark Baird, ladies and gentlemen, time has come for 51. No question. We need to move on for liberty.
Hey, CA, come out and play. Have you seen the bill we all have to pay? It's not our bill, we had no say. You don't serve us, you serve LA. The time has come for 51 in a Jefferson state of mind. You don't know us, you have no clue, and still you're telling us what to do. We don't know you or what you face. It's time to start a brand new state. The time has come for 50